watching morning star fade away. We've got coyotes greeting the sun and a rooster crowing. So we figure this is a good time to share some creepy stories, our testimony about some strange occurrences. We are out here in Arizona, and it seems to be a hot spot for a lot of paranormal activity. These events occur in the desert southwest and range thousands of miles. Many different sightings, many strange times that we went through and we didn't think we would ever get out of. So looking back, there is a lot more testimony coming out of people's experiences with some of what we encountered. We just feel like this is a perfect time to share this with the world. So get ready for some strange stories. I'm just going to leave the screen blank. I've got my wife with me who participated in these events. These strange and truthful experiences are first-hand accounts from throughout the desert southwest of North America and are of a supernatural and paranormal order. These instances occurred over a 5-month period from September 2014 to January 2015 and happened to my 26-year-old self and the 20-year-old girl who is my wife today. We took a scientific approach to document and extract as much information as possible after we survived these initial experiences. We bring this story out to seek the deeper meanings of what happened to us. A little bit of background about myself. Nothing too special. I just read books at age 4, was gifted in classes for math and language, and had a high IQ. Was a shy kid, a little bit nerdy. I had 2 loving parents, and still do to this day. I have a brother, 2 years my junior. The school system to me was imprisonment, and the Catholic religion I was born into was brainwashing. I was a bullied kid that grew into a rowdy teenager that was actually diagnosed with ODD, and that is oppositional defiant disorder, and it's a real term for those people that resist authority, and boy, I sure did resist the whole system, and even my own consciousness, which I quickly learned to abate with plants and their extracts. Phoenix, Arizona is the 6th largest city in America, and being so close to Mexico's border, is a drug and human trafficking hub to this day. So I'm going to ask you to reserve judging our past lifestyles until the end. I'm telling you all of this for both of our benefits, and although I may disgust many of our listeners who have not been in the dark recesses of humanity, I assure you all that this story has the happiest ending, so please endure through the depravity in which we were lost during our youth. So it was 2010, and I was a decade into being an active psychonaut, searching the depths of my mind with every substance I could find. I had developed a nice addiction for many of the commodities which I supplied from the cartel down in Mexico. Married the most beautiful girl I could find with the most ugly soul inside. That's how grievously shallow I was. I'd make a couple grand a day to spread fleeting fulfillment to people, followed by chains of misery. And I got to ingest as much expensive narcotics of the utmost purity as I desired. Yes, at age 21, I truly thought I had it all. Thankfully for young me, there are forces of the universe that yang you after you've been yanging too hard, and I got yanged in the last days of 2010. I was noticing a lot of strange stuff at that time. However, I just attributed it all to me being crazy. And I did 4 years in prison in the hardest yards in Arizona for selling plant extracts. So that was not good for my ODD. I ended up on high security yards due to my inability to follow their terms of imprisonment. I had so much time to seek inwardly, so I read and I read and I read. I also worked out religiously, which helped me go from an anorexic drug addict to a yoked up inmate in the best shape of my whole life. I studied nutrition and wrote poetry, and still sadly struggled with drugs when I could, even within the system, to dull the intense emotional pain and suffering of incarceration. I did not get any good time because I was not good. But by the end of this story, all this negative will be transformed into positive. So let's push forward. In August 2014, I was released and I had a clean slate and I was free. I had a spine that I had not previously had and a spirit to go with it. It was this time that I met a girl in the wrong place at the right time. This was to be the beginning of my strange life. Alright, I'm not just going to read all monotone from this. I'm going to add a little bit of life and inflection into this story. So I will pause it often and try and expand some of these thoughts that I put down. So this was when I met my wife, and I wasn't even supposed to be in town that day. I went a day early, and she was at a place with some people she didn't even know, wasn't even supposed to be there, and she was just sitting on the couch. It was kind of out of place, innocent beauty in a pit of demons. I was telling her my story. That was kind of a big deal and all, but she wasn't impressed. So I took her phone and I put my number in it with regards to procuring some mind-altering substances I was seeking. But by the end of the night, I ended up leaving her in this demon pit of a house. I didn't realize that she would have greatly appreciated a ride out of there. But it just wasn't in the direction that I was headed. So she did survive where I left her and eventually made it home. So days later, she was in another crappy place and we were in contact. So at this time, I did end up saving this girl from across town and giving her a ride back to her house. So I just dropped her off and went to a friend's house in a seedy neighborhood. And that's when she called me and said she left her purse in the trunk of my car. So I went to check, and yeah, it was there. But I was carjacked at knife point. Like, literally, a guy who had asked me for a ride down the street of that shady neighborhood had doubled back and grabbed me by the shirt and would have literally stabbed me with a knife, like an inch from my gut. So I pleaded and said, dude, what the F? I just got out of prison. This is my grandma's car, you know. So he said he needed to get some things from down the street urgently and that he would bring my car back to a certain nearby motel when he was done. And I just knew I never would see him ever again. As he drove my car away, he said, give me your number. And I yelled it at him. Still, such a sick feeling of disbelief and shock over the events taking place. Simply went and sat by a bus stop for a few hours, feeling so horribly. I waited until later in the day, not even having a direction to proceed in, when I did get a text telling me to get to the motel to get my car. I went to the seedy place where the guy gave me my keys back like it was all good, and I was just so happy to have my car back. I jumped in, took off, and went to see Strange Girl. But it was her parents' house, and it was getting late, so I was reluctant when she offered me to come in. But it was almost midnight, and her parents, she assured me, were sleeping. But once inside, I did feel a very watchful presence, like an invisible pressure, if you will. It felt as if someone was staring at me through the blinds, and she even seemed to be talking to someone through them, in a low-key kind of way, but I shrugged it off as paranoia. Now you can imagine, I was a little bit paranoid, guys, especially after I just got carjacked at knife point, and I had parked down the street. I didn't want to park in front of her house. So I suddenly had a strong urge to go check on my vehicle. I wasn't wanting to doubt my intuition. And not feeling comfortable with the whole atmosphere in her parents' house, I asked her to show me out. So at this point, she went to open the door to her room. Now, when I tell you these things, it's not in my mind, because she admitted what she did immediately after. And I would have admitted if I was mistaken and just moved on. But she opened the door and made it appear as if somebody was opening the door at the exact same time as her. Her face showed the shock and surprise and everything. No one was there, though. It was like she just did it to scare me. Like the look of shock on her face and just turning the door handle. I thought someone was literally opening the door. So she finished opening the door. I pulled her outside and I asked her just what was that about. She laughed like it was funny and like it was normal, till I pointed out to her how messed up it was to do to a guy who you just snuck into your parents' house with drugs. It kind of clicked in her head what she had done was different, and she acknowledged and agreed it wasn't normal to do that. So I was truly put off by how someone could think that that was even okay. She seemed so aloof as if she hadn't even known she was doing it until I pointed it out to her. This wouldn't be the last time, but it was for now. Her purse was gone along with all my trunk contents, and it even seemed vacuumed. Much cleaner than my car ever was. Such a clean trunk area that I doubted it was even the same car. So I got in my car, which had previously had an unopened glove box, but now it was open and the items were dumped on the floor. I told her to that I was going to get some cigarettes and I needed a moment, so I just left her. She called me at the exact second that I passed the gas station that I told her I was going to. All these things add up with that feeling of paranoia. These exact timing incidences. I didn't know if she knew what she was doing or not, but it seemed like everyone was just implicit in this, except for me. So she was telling me to come back to her house because her door handle had just came off. Like right into her hands, apparently, as she was now stuck outside. That was her problem and not mine. I was feeling that, and I hit the road and fled to a friend's house while I replayed the strange feelings and events of the last 24 hours in my mind. But because of a financial gain, the next day I went back to see Strange Girl. So much had happened, but I told myself I would give her another chance and maybe try and dissect just what was going on. Besides, it was daytime now, and not so eerie. When I picked her up, I was stunned. Maybe because it wasn't dark this time, I noticed her differently, as if she was another person entirely. She was beautiful, alert, and intelligent. It was as if I hadn't been seeing this person at all the other night. I let her know how I felt, and asked her what was up. She then relayed how the door handle had fallen off in her hand when she was going to go back into her house. And I guess she knocked for about a half an hour until her brother finally awoke and let her inside. So I was in disbelief how this could even happen. She said literally the door handle fell off in her hand and the inside part was still there, so her brother was finally able to open the door and let her in. There was no explanation for how that could even happen. So I was in disbelief, but we ran errands and enjoyed each other's company. And that's when the car battery died. The next evening, as it was getting dark, I was getting gas. We were at a gas station, and being on parole and fresh out of prison, I was not even trying to be on the radar at all. So I had her get a jump start, which point the battery literally blew up with a loud explosion. I don't know if the guy crossed the wires or what. He had a nice truck, so she let him do the connection, and boom. By the time I got a ride to buy a new battery and put it in, it was well past dark. And if it wasn't already bad, the eerie feelings pretty much pushed us along. We could not stay put, and it was tiring. I took her to a park by my grandmother's because it was night, and I tried to find a comfortable place to ease that pressure and unease that came from everywhere around us. It was beyond a paranoia. It was like an inert sense deep inside of me was set off in the presence of something I couldn't fully perceive. It was a force in people and places that we will get a better understanding of as the story continues. But to keep the nostalgia of the moment, I will lead you through this with the knowledge and understanding that I had at the time. And I was very unawake through all of this. I've done so much more research and study into things like this, but at the time, I literally felt like the CIA and every government agency everywhere, all the people, it got really bad. I felt like they were all watching me. Even my wife, I thought she was a cop. And this was just where logic went in my mind because of things that I'd known at the time. So went over to a little desert trail by a canal near my grandmother's house. We ended up taking a walk on a desert trail, and very distinctly in the starlit bushes a few meters beyond me, we heard a very human-like sound. It was like meh. So I went to see just who was hiding out there in the dark. Maybe it was some strange creature. Upon reaching the spot, I heard at the exact same distance away as the first time another meh. It didn't sound intimidating, but my companion was really freaked out by it. I wanted answers, so I went to where the sound had issued from again. And to my dismay at this point, I could clearly see the area contained nothing. And once again, the same distance away, I heard the meh again. This time she was trying frantically to call me away. This sinister thing was calling me into the night. I had to drop the pursuit in my best interest. And I was still convinced it was her cop friend or something, not trusting this strange girl just yet, and for good reason. The next day, we were parked in a parking space waiting for a friend when I noticed the girl doing some strange gestures, as if it were a coded message in a sign language, touching her ear, then eye, then mouth with two fingers. She had a glazed and aloof look in her eyes, so I followed it to a guy in a white van signaling back the same eerie movements. He literally had two fingers to his mouth as well, and I was just looking, and I was incredulous at this moment. I couldn't believe that they were so blatant to do this. I grabbed her wrist while she had two fingers up to her mouth, and I asked her, just what the F are you doing? She says, let go of me, I'm just smoking a cigarette. So I pulled her hand far enough away from her mouth for her to see that she doesn't have a cigarette. So I asked her what cigarette. She just looked down at her empty fingers and said, oh, in complete surprise. Like it really like broke some brainwashing. Like it was like a spell had been lifted. So I let her know of her activities and sharpened my awareness, thinking this was all some kind of sinister plot by mere humans to bring me down somehow. I began digging for information and digesting the world around me that I'd failed to properly examine before I'd went to prison. I decided to take us to an old friend's house who I'd grown up with. He had to be normal, right? Like I knew this guy a long time, but I was wrong. I don't even think these people knew what they were doing. I mean, at the time, I thought these people might have just all gotten in trouble while I'd been gone. Like, what had happened, right? I'd been gone too long, and it was such a shock to see the world in this state. So it was once again evening. We were smoking pot and telling stories. I noticed a strange girl getting these glossy eyes again. So we went back from the side of my friend's yard into the garage. And I noticed strange girl getting those glossy eyes again and just staring. So I followed the stare across the garage to my friend, who seemed to be the stare instigator. Yeah, that's right. It sounds crazy, but this was not googly eyes. At first, I kind of thought, what are you doing staring into this girl's eyes who I just brought over? But this was like piercing into someone's soul type of a gaze. I realized she was locked in the stare and somewhat powerless looking, so I instinctively moved behind her and put my hand over her eyes. This immediately made him object, stating that he was just trying to help her relax. I said bullshit, and I saw what was going on. He said to me, you know? And I simply replied, know what, mother effer? At that point, we left the scene quickly, which resulted in my friend literally calling 10 times and leaving 50 text messages as if it were the most natural thing to do, trying to explain it away and get us to come back. And she literally even said, yeah, okay, let's just go back. At which point I had to remind her again just what had happened and how strange this all was. So I took us to another place to see this guy that I'd met a few times before. And by now it's late. It's like 2 a.m. He had a hotel room because that's what these type of people do. It was day and night enterprises of the most devious sorts, but we fit right in with the scenes. So we arrived at this new acquaintance's hotel room and began telling him our world and how it was recently really starting to get to me. He then tried to pierce my eyes with a serpent-like gaze, and he looked puzzled and told me, "How strange. You are not like most humans," and stated that he couldn't read me and he's never had that happen before. He then got Strange Girl stuck into his eyes like Shere Khan does to Mowgli in the Jungle Book. She was giggling and eye-struck, his piercing gaze diving ever deeper. He told us everything that had happened to us that day, like verbatim. I don't know what to say or do other than to think it was a cop who watched me all day. The FBI playing an elaborate hoax to mess with little old me. But no CIA rushed in to bust me, and his girlfriend took Strange Girl to the bathroom and started just rambling on in gibberish type words. And he started to do the same to me. But he looked in my eyes, and he told me things through them. Alright, I got my kids outside. Gonna keep going with this. Let's recap. So I was at my friend's house. We were in Anthem, Arizona. It's about 20 miles north of Phoenix. And let's see. I'm just going to keep this going. I don't need to show you guys anything. I'm just going to talk. Anthem, Arizona, I left really quickly because my friend started just staring into my partner's eyes. And it was really strange. And we left so quickly that I left some of the stuff that we were doing. So I went to this other guy's place. It's a hotel room. He literally looked into my eyes right now at this point in the story and asked me if I would understand what he meant if he said that he communicates with like wireless cable. But in his eyes, like he literally showed me what he was talking about mentally. And I knew, like, and I said yes. So he said telepathically, and he began encoded word messages at like rapid fire pace. I was trying to make sense of them, and they were making sense, but I was trying to absorb them. They were so fleeting and fast. He was just speaking things like the wireless cable, but it really meant telepathy. So like anyone hearing that, they'd be like, wireless cable, what's that guy talking about, right? But it made sense to me. It's strange, right? I never had like any experience like this up until this point in my life. So, he spoke and told me that he was literally like an ancient terrestrial race of shape-shifting reptilian. I'd never heard of anything like this at this point in my life. Nor did I think this man in front of me was such a thing. But he was making claims that the Egyptians and Mesopotamians used to know about us. And that humanity is so forgetful. They said man used to watch the stars, and they show the signs of New Age and the awakening of man, and all of this, he was just spilling forth. He said that humanity is under their control from the shadows, but we're literally just like cattle on a ranch, like it's prison, right? We build our own cages, we enslave and bring about our own children's and grandchildren's enslavement and retardation for eternity. All right, so like, it sounded kind of crazy. I couldn't see anything that he was talking about at the time because I was living completely unawake. The people. Oh, okay, so now he claims that the people were going to wake up. So they were coming out to bag and tag every single human and enslave the whole race on the surface. He then goes on to say, not all of them wish to hurt humans. He claimed if they knew, he was telling me this stuff right now, that they would destroy him. But he said, you're different, and it's all just a big production. So he said, might as well let you know, because you're going to see it, and you can't stop it. I asked him if there was a safe place to go, and he laughed and replied, no, but a friend says Wisconsin should be safe for a while. He keeps unloading this rapid fire jargon encoded with meanings, and I'm pretty much in a trance, you guys. Like, I'm not believing this, but I'm entertaining him. But it's like, it felt like I was just above my body watching myself, honestly. It was so strange. Like, I eventually started to nod off, and suddenly, snapping my head up off my chin, I realized that Strange Girl was still in the bathroom with his girlfriend, getting babbled at in an alien tongue. Like, I couldn't even hear what was being said. It was just, like, just insane. So, he looked at me incredulously and said, "You're still here?" So like I literally snap my head up off my chest, just my chin's on my chest. I'm like starting to sleep. And bam, I'm just back in my body. I wake up, look at this guy who's still staring at me, and he just says, "You're still here?" It's like 6 a.m. So I was on instant red alert as everything came flooding back to me. I started right up and I grabbed Strange Girl away from the other jabbering girl in the bathroom. So we opened the door to the pre-sunrise dawn. Now this was freaky, guys. We hurried to the car. Like, we were just falling over ourselves to get out of there. She told me everything she knew about what had just happened. She was just giggling hysterically. Like, she didn't even say anything. She was laughing, like, hysterically. I told her if she was a cop, why don't they just arrest me right now? She had to be for that guy to know every single thing that we'd done. And what about the rambling reptilian talk? He sounded like a homeless drunk madman. And how did the time vanish like that, right? Like, my mind was completely boggled. It was nuts. Still is. We started our day by sleeping in the car somewhere. Over the next week or two of September 2014, we dug deeply into the snippets we could render from our experience. This guy had brought up reptilians, so we were doing research, and all it brought up things about like the Anunnaki, or this crazy guy David Icke. We should have listened rather than shrugged it off, but it was all too surreal. Paranoid schizophrenia, psychotic drug experiences, group hallucinations. Anything sounded more acceptable than what this guy had just done to us. I hate to go past details, but if I don't, you guys, I'll never finish this story in the format that I'm trying to condense it into. So just know that these are amongst many other intense experiences. I did go try and tell my parents about this. We tried to bring this up to people that we dealt with in our lives, and just got completely shut down. And it's just this conditioning, right? So we were right there at this point. Like, this is the beginning of like our awakening, right? Like, it took a while too, and we almost died a lot of times. There were definitely things after us, as you guys will hear. So I was hoping paranoid schizophrenia, psychotic drug experiences, or even maybe we're both hallucinating. During this time, our car had to go to the shop 5 times for various petty reasons. One day we woke up and it just wouldn't even start at all. No reason. Not even with a jump or anything. They didn't even tell me what was wrong at the shop. They just charged us for the tow and made some lame excuse. I'd begun photographing everything at this point. I noticed chemtrails at this point in the sky. I've been really noticing this stuff because I was locked up for 4 years and I got out, and it was just completely atrocious to me. I know everyone else went through it slowly, but it was like day and night. When I got out, it was a completely different world. So this stuff starts to sink in, but I was really hard-headed. I began photographing everything with camera filters, and that's when I hit pay dirt. Like, I had a really cheap phone, but it had that negative filter option. So I was filming and taking pictures in that, and when they were working on the car, I took a picture of it, and it was shocking. Like, it showed the items in the car's trunk as if it were x-rayed. Like, the car showed up kind of just, green, and it was that negative filter that did it, but you could see right through the trunk, and all the contents were visible through the car. Strangely transparent, just like an x-ray. That evening we took the car and stayed in a quiet parking lot of a closed business. While there, I was intrigued by a landscaping light that cast a shadow of a tree against a cinder block wall. The whole of the tree was gray, except for the trunk part of the shadow. It was casting what looked like the blackest black you could ever create. And strangely, it was in the shape of a man leaning against that tree. So the tree trunk was casting a shadow. You could see the tree trunk in the shadow, but then there was just a black silhouette of a man leaning against this scene, this shadow scene. It was so utterly dark that nothing in this reality adequately describes the level of darkness from this silhouette before us. So therefore I had my negative filter on, and I started to record, and this is when I noticed how completely different things looked through the electronics. Now this was a cheap prepaid $30 phone, but what we saw was a giant, evil, goblin-like entity. This entity was in turn broken into two other nightmarish creatures that were part of the first, and those broke down further into many more infinitely smaller pictures. They were separate, but all part of the bigger picture. The shadow figure was still there, but had an emaciated chihuahua dog barking at his feet incessantly as the tree danced lightly in the wind. You could see it as clear as the most realistic cartoon. I was pointing to the figures and asking her what she saw so that I wouldn't skew the results. She was accurate with everything. Scenes within scenes unfolded. Creatures danced around a campfire. They looked like garden gnomes. A freakish gesture appeared to come out and shoot the shadow guy's brains out with a cartoonish revolver, and the dog started to lap them up. It was not fantasy in our minds. This was all verified, and after 45 minutes of filming, we had to pull ourselves away. The scenes seemed to cross realities. The large demonic goblin that contained all of these beings and worlds, simply from a cast shadow on a tree, from a tree on a wall, from a simple landscaping light. That demonic figure opened its mouth in a roar as a motorcycle revved up and passed by us. The sound fit the scene perfectly, as its mouth gaped open and meshed with the sound of the motorcycle passing. Then it closed perfectly timed as the sound faded.